This is TWiT.
Late last week, the popular language learning app Duolingo tweeted that the company had achieved a 50-50 gender ratio for new software engineering hires, and they were aiming for 50-50 gender breakdown company-wide. Now, many of the responses to the tweet were critical of the company, arguing against hiring people because of their gender, saying it was insulting to women, and worse. Joining us to clarify the hiring practices for software engineers at Duolingo is Christine Raetsch, Duolingo's head of people. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Megan. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you guys about the post and what was behind it, and then hopefully clear up some misconceptions that are out there.
I am hoping so too. So some of the complaints about the tweet said that Duolingo must have had to lower standards, or they discriminated against men in order to achieve gender parity among software engineers. Now, is that in any way true?
Yeah, flatly no, right? So we definitely did not lower standards. We weren't discriminating. And it's so sad that something that as positive as this tweet was, taken in that context and really looked at through that lens. So it's just disappointing to see some of those comments, to think that, hiring more women automatically somehow means that we must have lowered the bar. It's really disappointing. I think the biggest misconception that was kind of underlying a lot of those tweets was this idea that somehow hiring is a zero-sum game. That if I hire a woman, I'm not hiring another qualified man. And I have to tell you, at least at Duolingo, we need so many qualified engineers, product managers, designers, that I would hire as many qualified people that hit our bar as I could. So this idea of it being a zero-sum game, it's just not true, again, at least at Duolingo.
So give us like a high-level explanation of how the recruiting process works. I mean, you must have so many people apply for this job. Like, everybody loves this app. Everybody uses this app. So how does it work? Recruiting?
Yeah, so, recruiting is like any other sales or marketing funnel. You're starting at the top of the funnel, trying to generate a lot of interest and get a lot of people in at the top. And so there's really two ways to do that. One is, people can apply through our Duolingo jobs page. We do get a fair amount of traffic there. But if you think about the type of person that we're after for these very specialized world-class engineers, is really what we're after. If you think about that population, what we find is that we have to go actively recruit them. So we have to spend time at their schools, do these tech talks, talk to their student groups. We have to get in front of them because they're being so heavily sought after by so many other companies that we really have to be proactive. So, it is this mix of passive candidates that we find through the Duolingo jobs page, but a lot of it is, hard work out at the colleges and universities trying to drum up interest.
So this tweet came, in the last couple of weeks or the last week or so. But the post, you guys had a blog post earlier in the year. It was in January that was also on this topic, how Duolingo achieved a 50-50 gender ratio for new software engineer hires. And there was something in there, I think it was within the first paragraph, where it notes that prior to the changes that you made in your hiring process, a number of the women that were offered jobs with Duolingo, none of them accepted. What do you feel led to those women passing on these roles like the ones that you offer? What exactly was missing at that point that led to these changes?
Yeah, Jason, it's a great question. And I think we did a lot of soul searching after our 2016 hiring season. We really went back and said, what should we rethink in this whole process from beginning to end? One of the key things that we did was we had an unconscious bias training that we did with the whole company. And we engaged every employee in that training. And one of the workshops within that training was, hey, help us understand what might be happening in the hiring process. What are those sort of unconscious biases or components of the process that may be less welcoming to different kinds of groups? And we got a ton of feedback from employees. Things like, hey, at the very beginning of the process, why don't we do a task that is automated in terms of grading instead of having a human be involved in that. So to kind of strip out the bias right from the very beginning, thinking about diverse slates of interviewers, making sure those interviewers are all trained on unconscious bias, really thinking about the environment that those candidates are experiencing when they get here, the entire process from beginning to end. So we talked to the candidates who turned us down. Again, did a lot of soul searching. We asked the tough questions of those candidates and really listened to what they had to say. And we've kept in contact with a lot of those folks too over the years to try to get their feedback on how we could even improve the process and make it even better. So, just a lot of time and attention on this. To be really honest, there's no magic solution here. It's just a lot of hard work looking at every single component of the process.
Now, did I read correctly that you were one of the Duolingo's first employees, like one of the first 10 employees?
Oh, Megan, if that were true, that would be amazing. I came along a little bit later.
Okay.
I wish that were true.
I don't know where I read that, so good thing I didn't spread fake news. It's not just about hiring, but it's keeping employees too. And we've all heard the stories of people who were hired, and then the culture was just not a friendly place, and so they left. Like, are you doing anything to keep employees there that other companies might not be doing, or that you think that is working better now than it might have worked in the past?
Yeah, Megan, it's a great point. We're really proud of our retention numbers. So, we have a really low attrition rate. People, when they get here, they tend to come and they tend to stay. And they tend to stay, we're 6 years old. We have folks that have hit their 5-year anniversaries and on, which is amazing. And we'd love to see even more of that. But I think one of the things that's magic about this place is, that connection to the mission, the idea of doing something kind of bigger than yourself. Once you get in here and you see the impact that you can have, it really kind of is this virtuous circle that kind of feeds on itself. I think the other part is, we're small enough in terms of still being a startup where you get that all the benefits of being in a startup, that feeling of ownership and, you're really getting to push code that has impact really quickly on millions of users. And in a lot of the big companies, you just, you're optimizing a button or a certain feature and you don't get that same feeling of that broad impact. They're working on really tough engineering challenges. And I would say we have one of the best engineering departments in the world. So, again, once you come here, there's so much opportunity to learn and continue to grow that people tend to stay. I think the other benefit that we have going for us that, again, can be a headwind in the recruiting process is Pittsburgh. So, people really get sucked into the great lifestyle here. Cost of living is amazing. And so, again, once they get over the hump of maybe getting to Pittsburgh for their first time, then they tend to fall in love and stay.
Now, when you have a workforce that's equally distributed the way that you have at Duolingo, what are the effects from that? I mean, I feel like we've talked about this on the show, but I'm curious to hear how this relates to the Duolingo app and all the products that you create. What are the quality attributes that you see in your product as a result of that diversity? And I would venture to say that that's a really important, it gains perspective from all different angles. But how does that translate into Duolingo?
It's a good one. That was fantastic. Yeah, I think, the end game for any consumer product is ideally you would love the people working on the product to be reflective of the end consumer, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're meeting their needs. Very global audience. So we do our best to try to mirror that. We still have a long way to go in a lot of the other areas. But I think having folks that can really understand the experience from a user perspective and speak to what might be different for them and how they might be interacting with different features in ways that we wouldn't expect is really a key to success.
We're using the word diversity, and what we really mean, we're really talking about gender mostly, because I think one of the other criticisms of the tweet was there was a picture of all the women that you had hired, and many people pointed out that there wasn't a single Black woman in that group. So what do you, I know that the CEO has talked about that and talked about how you're working to do better in that area. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we have work to do there. Our work in this space, in terms of really being an inclusive work environment, is frankly never going to be done. There'll always be an additional kind of bar that we want to raise here. As I mentioned, we have a global audience, so we want to keep in front of mind that consideration of making sure that our workforce reflects that dynamic as well. So we're doing a ton on, again, the university recruiting side. We're doing a lot of partnerships with groups like NSBE and other local student organizations and trying to really get in and work with them more on the ground. So definitely we have work to do. By no means is our inclusion journey done, and I'm excited to see what will happen this year and in the future.
I'm curious to touch on something that you talked about a few minutes ago and go back to it, which is this your unconscious bias training. How much of a challenge is that? I have to imagine that in such a diverse, workforce, people go into that thinking, oh yeah, there's nothing there. I'm not biased in any way. This is going to be a piece of cake. Is it an eye-opening experience for people that go through that, where they're like, well, I mean, it's in the name, unconscious bias. They may not even be, realize that. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, this idea of unconscious bias is so important to unpack and explore in each company setting, right? Because I think it manifests itself in different ways in different company cultures. So here we did a really interesting activity where, it's very research-based what we bring within Duolingo. As you can appreciate, they're, scientists and engineers, and so they want to understand the research behind a lot of the practices that we bring to them. So we leverage the Neuro Leadership Institute's work on this topic a lot. And because of that, it's very actionable. So it's not just talking about the issues, it's talking about solutions as well. And so again, in a lot of the trainings that we did, we had workshops. And to the example of, we talked about how unconscious bias can manifest itself in the hiring process, and then immediately went and said, okay, how do we fix this? Let's right now do a deep dive on our hiring process and make it feel like we're taking action and we're doing things to change it. So another thing that we did that I think went really well in this company culture was we used examples, like real life examples of how unconscious bias might be happening here. And so we used, little interactions between colleagues or on teams or just little things that can happen. And we had little group discussions about those actual smaller incidents. So it just brought it home for people. It made it real. It was, how can I say this, Jason? It was like a colleague talking to their friend about what's important to them. And I think that's why it had such an impact here and really made a difference.
So I think a lot of the responses to the tweet are, basically based in fear. Like there won't be a place for me. Like I won't get a job. My kids won't get a job. I mean, it's what we're seeing a lot right now. So for young people or parents of young people, what recommendations do you have to really be prepared if software engineering at a competitive company like Duolingo is something that they dream of doing?
Yeah, it's, first and foremost, the basics, study hard. We rely a lot on GPA as a screen. So, make sure even at a young age that they're working really hard. But there's some interesting work that I think Planet Money did in the space of understanding why women started to leave the computer science field in the 1980s. And one of their hypotheses was that, women started to opt out of the computer science major. At the time, they made up like 35% of all computer science majors, and then it dropped off like a cliff. And one of the hypotheses that they had was that corresponded with computers entering the home as toys. And because they were technology, it was a boy's toy, not a girl's toy. And so boys were socialized very early on to, play with computers, and that's how you play, is with this tool, this technology tool. So really, being aware of how we can expose girls and frankly everyone to these different experiences, to not inadvertently close them off through socialization or different play, or in middle school starting to gate them away from math and science and pushing them a little bit. I hate to say that too, but when I think about my own experience growing up, my mom was a teacher, my dad was an engineer, and I thought that I would be a teacher because that's the mental model that I had in my head about what women do in the workplace. And it wasn't until I found myself in financial services many years later in more of a technical career that even my eyes were opened to what I was capable of and the possibilities that I had. So, not limiting ourselves is also, I think, a really important part of this discussion, and pushing people to do more, especially those young kids, telling them that they can do anything is really important.
I hesitate whether to show this to my daughter or not, because I think you just said play more video games. If girls had played more video games.
Not sure, Megan.
Thank you so much for joining us. Christine Raetsch is the head of people for Duolingo. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Christine. We'll talk to you soon.